Welcome back to another episode of Greenlit. Today we're chatting with producer, executive, and a real industry titan, Bill Mechanic. Bill, first off, I just want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy, and so thanks for joining for a conversation.
No problem. Titans have to do those sorts of things.
They do indeed. And for those that are listening to this and not watching the video piece of it, the posters that I see behind Bill on his wall, which is very rarely a place I start a conversation, but I see Fight Club and I see Titanic, which are two of obviously some of the most important movies ever. And as he moves the camera around, there's Moulin Rouge, and I see Thin Red Line as well. So obviously Bill, and then Romeo and Juliet also. So some really exciting titles. Your career has spanned so many amazing filmmakers and eras of filmmaking and cinema and the theatrical experience and the change to home entertainment, and the things you've seen have been pretty remarkable. And that's a lot to unpack, especially with titles as big as those. And we're going to focus today around certainly Titanic, certainly Fight Club. But I'd love to just start by way of background, just having you introduce yourself, how you got into the business. Obviously, again, that could be a very granular question, but you can stay high level and then you can sort of free flow from there as to where you are today and what that path has looked like.
Okay, well, it's all an accident. Mostly a good accident, though. I grew up wanting to be a writer and loved movies. Loved to read, love movies. When I was an undergraduate, it was lit, and I had to take a class. I didn't have to take a class. I took a class in journalism to work on my writing. Had to get published. I'm not a reporter, so I thought, well, what can I do? I like movies, so I wrote a film review and sent it in. And I've told the story before, but the film critic for the big college daily, in Michigan State Daily, Michigan State News, called me and said, "You're better than me. You should take the job." And I was like, thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. And he said he wanted to go off and make movies. It turned out later we reunited and stayed friends as Jack Apps, who wrote Top Gun. Then I went to film school. I went to grad school at USC for film, and that was, that really kind of iced it. I learned in film school I wasn't going to be I didn't have the talent to be the director, but I could do other things, and it sort of centered to me either on the writing or on producing, and then I just took a series of kind of side steps, into being an executive, which I wasn't really trained for, but it worked out okay. And ended up running, went from Paramount, my first studio job, to helping build Disney. So I was a fourth employee with Eisner and Wells in Katzenberg, and built out a lot of the infrastructure at Disney, and then I was supposed to go off to produce there. That was my deal, but they didn't want me to produce. They wanted me to be an executive. So they kept giving me things to do. I ran a bunch of divisions. I learned theatrical, or learned home video. I ran worldwide home video. I produced specials, ran pay TV, hired. Most of the people were running divisions, and when all that was done, quit, and because I didn't want to do all that. It was all good, but it wasn't what I wanted to do, and I wanted to produce. So I was just going to go off, and then I got a call, and then went over, instead of producing, went over and became president and then CEO of Fox, and had butted heads over all the what I think are pretty great movies too.
Yeah.
With Murdoch, till the point that that was it, and I finally pursued my kind of lifelong ambition to actually just produce the movies.
So unwinding then, going backwards just for a second, what was the year when the Disney era with Eisner and Katzenberg, the early build out, and what films were you guys working on back then? And I have to imagine that was crazy exciting, building out that team.
Yeah, I mean, Paramount too. It was Paramount at its prime. It was Flashdance and Footloose and Songs of Endearment and Top Gun and Beverly Hills Cop, and everything seemed to be working. And that was kind of environment. To a certain extent, Michael Eisner took me under his wing. I switched to my last year at Paramount to development under Katzenberg, under Jeffrey, and then Paramount blew apart. Diller went to run Fox, and Michael Eisner went to run Disney. And because I then was the odd kind of duck in a studio, and that I wasn't a specialist, I was actually kind of a generalist. I had developed films, I had distributed films, I had marketed films, did video, I did pay TV, and I did television.
Mhm.
So, that's why I was so early in the queue for them, because I could help them set up Disney, and that was uh, that was 1984 to 93.
What were you working on at that time? I'm curious what the first films out of the gate were in 93, 94 at Disney.
Well, I wasn't producing then. That was my pure executive work, and
Got it.
the films were, it's all the stuff. The best stuff obviously became the heyday of the new animation, of
Yeah,
Beauty and the Beast, and Lion King was the final movie to come around. Little Mermaid, just before it, and I met filmmakers, like Peter Weir with Green Card, but it was one of those periods where it was just, the quality of the movies was great. Who Framed Roger Rabbit,
sure.
Nightmare Before Christmas built a relationship with Henry Selick, which led to a core line as a producer. Tim Burton on Frankenweenie. So it was sort of like that, and then they started making too many movies, and that wasn't very much fun for me. It's like the idea, and you can see it on the streamers, that volume is an anathema to quality,
Yes,
and you know, and that was what was driving me out of doing that, and just focus on things that were quality control. That even if you're doing the oversight of things, oversight of too many things is not as much fun as trying to get something to be really good.
for sure. Yeah, and you touch. I mean, I totally agree on the volume game of what the streamers have done and how difficult it becomes to even find. We were talking about this the other day. I won't even name which streamer. We're just in the office saying, okay, of this streamer, what's your favorite original film from that platform? And you struggle to even identify them. I just
Yeah,
think the
I used
cultural
to,
relevance of those movies is so different, and the quality of them is so different than the heyday.
yeah, I didn't think it. I used to do that with the movie business in general. Give me the last great, not good movie. What's the last great movie you've seen? But if you said, what's the last great movie on any of the streamers, I would say there isn't.
Right.
I mean, great is a different even
Correct.
category, and hard enough to do in the broad world of 7 companies producing, but in the streaming world, they're just trying to get stuff up on the screen, and you know not understanding that 1 or 2 good things make more difference than 100 bad things.
For sure.
To me,
Rewinding for a second on something you
yeah,
said about having butted heads during the Fox era with Murdoch, but obviously that was a run of some really amazing films. Curious on what that looked like, the butting heads, to the extent you can go into it. I'm sure there are parts of it you can't or don't want to, but I'd love to explore what did that look like. And again, the significance of those movies in that period are so unbelievably relevant even to today.
well, he hated movies. You can see the disrespect or the disregard for movies just by what he did to Fox. He destroyed 100-year legacy by dumping it into Disney. That's like a crime to me. But that attitude was pervasive. The bigger thing was I thought he was a rail baron when I went to work there. That he was just a moneymaker and didn't. They had come out of a tough time, almost been bankrupt. Fox was the bottom
Yeah,
of, of the barrel in terms of studios, and as I always say, I went to final interview with Murdoch was I went to the Fox executive building and it said Fox Fi Corp. The LM had fallen off, and nobody had bothered to even fix it. That was sort of and he was gonna, I think, at that stage sell off the lot. And I said, if I take the job and you sell off a lot, essentially you're a banker, you're not a movie company, and no interest. So he agreed to fix things and, gave me the money. I worked for Chernin at the time, but, it was me really designing the plans of how to rebuild Fox. When I got there and I wanted to screen a movie, I had to rent it from Sony because they had leased the main theater to Sony. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
it was that bad. But he gave enough money to pick up development, to rebuild all the departments, which I did. I had 18 departments and I've replaced the heads of 16 of them, and took Fox from 0 to #1. But in the process, the better we did, the more he kind of disliked me. And along the way, I saw him not for wanting money, but what you see from what's happened over the last 5 years, 10 years in the U.S. and then in Britain, politically, that he's arch conservative and is a disruptor more than anything else. And I didn't want to work for that, but I was too, I always said I had situational ethics, that I didn't have ethics.
Yeah.
So it was too soon to 6 months in there when I saw what I was getting. It was too soon to quit, and then I didn't want to because I was building something. And so my dislike was apparent, openly apparent. And so the more success we had, the more his dislike, the return of that came to me. So by the end of it, we would sit in a meeting and he would look to, be pointing to the side. He wouldn't even look at me. And yet they were trying to negotiate a new contract, which I wouldn't sign. So it was just he would insult, like, you movie people, and some of the stuff we given out, Fight Club, what kind of sick human being would make a movie like that? Titanic, I got the biggest movie in history, and he goes, "You're lucky."
Why did you think it was lucky? Just that the film had hit?
Yeah, that I guess you're lucky. Said to me when he saw it, I screened it for him before before it was finished. I'm going to say there's a chance to see all your money up on the screen before we cut some, and it was 20 minutes or 25 minutes came out of that cut, and he called me the next morning and said, "Well, I see why you like the movie, but it's no Air Force One." And then we got to other movie. Every movie was was a was a battle in terms of, it was so so much an anathema to his own, what he liked, which is popcorn. The stature of these movies, which are still today, most, not all of them, but certainly more of them, was great. I always say, I got fired the week before X-Men came out because I thought that they called it my $70 million art film.
Right. I love it. Well, yeah, that's actually a good segue, Bill, on that point, which is these are big movies, but they're also very director driven, right? You've got Fincher, you've got Cameron, you've obviously got both Moulin Rouge and I saw, I believe, as well, Romeo and Juliet. So you've got these very direct, Baz Luhrmann, very director driven vehicles that you were making. I want to sort of fast forward that backdrop to today. How much has that changed? Director-driven, auteur-driven content, both studio, streamer, and independent side, and getting projects like that made today where there's a big, bold vision, and also you're buying into oftentimes someone pretty tyrannical in terms of how they're going to get that vision onto a screen.
Actually, if I could back it actually wasn't. It was director-driven via script. So actually, script is king to me more. Moulin Rouge, Baz was pissed to be shit. Peter Rice, who later was went to from Fox running all the TV to senior person in TV at Disney. But I sent Peter Rice down to Australia for the last 6 months before I greenlit
Yeah.
Moulin Rouge to get the script to work. So to me the auteur theory has kind of
Sure.
been a misdirection in the business, that certainly the better the material and the better the director, the better the movie, the
Yep.
better the actors. You produce movies, it's a collaborative art. People forget it. And when it gets too out of whack, when the director has 100% control, I think the movie, you forget the Shakespeare thing, the play's the thing,
Right.
that there should be checks and balances on everything. And you look at, there's one of the big movies this year with a great director, I think, that's a kind of a terrible movie. I don't want to badmouth somebody, but I watched it and thought, oh, there's no checks and balances on this. Nobody
Right.
ever said, this is a really shitty idea for a movie. And it doesn't matter how much talent you have, it's still a shitty movie.
Mm-hmm. So to you, the backbone of the script is still going to be the way, the lens through which you're going to make decisions on what you want to jump into, what you think gets made. Now, again, you brought it up earlier in the discussion. All these platforms are just in the game of volume to try and build subscriber base. And so they're going to greenlight things that don't have those checks and balances. But as a producer or people listening to this that are making content, getting content greenlit or trying to get it greenlit, to you, it's all script. Forgetting about, if you want to make something quality, it's all script.
If you don't have a script, you're praying.
Right.
And there's certainly, there are talented enough directors, because the next important thing is a director, or even a talented star can shine in something that's not great. That's most of the Academy nominated pictures. They're not great movies. There are some that are like, brilliantly acted, so that there's a raison d'etre, there's a reason for them to be. But if you really want to aim at the highest level, you're trying to assemble all those things, and that's what a producer does.
Right.
The producer is meant there to be an overseer, not to get in the way of I don't get in the way of directors, and short of you're a voice,
Sure,
a strong enough voice to deal with strong people. So it's Jim Cameron, and he's going to try and kill you during the making of a movie.
yeah.
But you're there. Generally, for me, it starts with we develop the material. Most of those films, whether it was Fight Club, Jim was on Titanic is different. That was his own idea, and he didn't write the full script, but he wrote enough of the script that you knew what the movie was. But almost every other movie of those are developed by this, either developed by a studio or developed by, Pandemonium, my production company. So, and then you find who's the best person for it. So Fight Club, bringing David on to Fight Club, there was a script. It was very good. It would never have been that movie. It would have been as I described it when we were going to make it, it was supposed to be a cheap, inexpensive, not cheap, but an inexpensive, very dark movie.
Yeah.
And David brought brilliance to it. He didn't make it good. He made it great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he made that movie timeless. He really did. It's funny when we have even new interns that join our team. Each cycle of interns, we have the icebreaker game where each person sets their Zoom background if they're remote or in person. They'll put it on a screen around a scene from an iconic film that's their favorite film, and then the rest of the group has to guess it. And I would say for the last 5-10 years, we've been having intern classes like this. Not an intern class goes by where an 18 to 20-year-old's background is set to Fight Club. Like the relevancy of that movie still today in culture is just so massive. It can't be overstated. I mean, to me, that was a light bulb moment of, I didn't even know you could make movies like this, especially get them out wide. When I was young, wanting to get into entertainment, sort of chase my own ambitions and path. So it's definitely one of those movies, like you said. I remember Chuck Palahniuk. I liked him as a writer and had read some of the work, but I was by no means some huge reader of his novels. And then that book, or that adaptation of that book was just so spectacular on so many levels. But
and then we grossed all of $9 million first weekend.
How did that film? Yeah, I'm so curious to perform. Like I've actually never dug into economically. I mean, obviously it's a cult hit, and I'm sure home video has crushed it beyond belief
Right.
over the years. But what was the immediate reception back then?
We got killed.
Yeah.
I mean, we did $9 million, gross $30 million total in the U.S. You know, and it was always, you know, and some of it's our fault. You know, I think if we had the internet, you know, if the world was the world of today, there would have been a way to sell it. You know, something called Fight Club, I said was a problem because, you know, that's a guy title, but it's a guy title who's looking for Rocky or Creed now. You know, they're looking for glamorized fighting, and you know, Fight Club is anything but that. It's
right.
You know, it's a completely different movie, and women who love the movie wouldn't get near something called Fight Club. So we were in a box. But I called David the Wednesday before the Friday opening and said, you know, there are going to be two judgments on this film. One is going to be Friday, which I said I don't know how that will be, but it doesn't look great. And then there's going to be a judgment of history, and I thought that history would judge us like extremely well, that it was anthemic, if anything. And you know, and it's a picture that had something to say beyond just being like dazzling. You know, his skill level is you know, he's in top whatever number you want. You know, he's one of the best filmmakers out there. And again, he plus that material, but you know, it still was difficult material. We didn't, you know, I feel bad today even that we didn't get it to work, but you know, that people found it. You know, it was safer on home video, the word of mouth. You know, people ultimately what drives any movie is word of mouth. You know, can you hold long enough in a theater, you know, to get enough people to go? And there are a lot of different ways that you could do that. And then today's world, I mean, you look at the volume, you know, and almost every hit on, and I'll just do Netflix, almost every hit on Netflix is word of mouth driven.
Right.
You know, whether it's Queen's Gambit, which who the hell gives a shit about a chess series, you know, a movie about a woman in chess. It's like you know, that's like a crazy idea to be one of their biggest hits, or Stranger Things, or, you know, Fauda, or you know, Squid Game. They're all like, no, forget the big stuff. It's the little stuff that's working because they're good. And people talk. So what happened with Fight Club is we went from this flop theatrically. You know, we didn't have the same problem overseas. It did $100 million overseas, so it did do business there. But once it hit video and then pay TV, it became Fight Club. So it's hugely profitable, but it was like an ugly scene because, you know, even before, like, Murdoch hadn't seen the movie and was when he's sat at an open meeting with me and like, what kind of sick human being made it? I'm gonna watch the fucking movie first. You know, if you still feel the same thing, then come on, then say whatever you want to say to me. But you know, that's you know, I didn't know, I wasn't, and you know, I wasn't sorry for making a movie. I thought that's exactly what you're supposed to do. I did Fight Club, I greenlit Fight Club when I was in the middle of being tortured over Titanic, because I thought running a studio, you know, if you run from things, that's the lesson of history, is that the big movies that failed weren't what sunk the studio, or the studio had. What sunk them was the fear of what was happening to them, and they stopped making decisions. And I thought, you got to go against the grain, you know.
It's
something about Mary came out of the same period, you know. So those were completely against the grain movies.
It's funny. I was in a conversation on this show talking with another another folks who was just another guy who had run a studio as well, and had made a comment about when you start a studio job as an executive, an egg timer starts, and it's not if but when that will come to an end, and that's always been the case, and it's sort of this
Yeah.
rotating, constant carousel. Why do you think that is? Obviously, there's 1,000 reasons, but I'm curious from your perspective. You just talked about sort of decision-making paralysis that leads to maybe bad decisions or lack of decision-making that could break somebody down and they're out the door. But for what you've seen, and you've been at a handful of studios and had big executive roles.
So to me, it's it's movies or movie studios are very kin to sports. So, there's a saying in baseball, managers hired to be fired.
Yeah.
That, when you hit 300 in baseball, you're a star, you're an all-star, you're a, superstar. That means 7 out of 10 times you're making it out.
Yeah.
That same kind of thing happens in running a studio, no matter what you do, and no matter what skill level you have, no matter how hard you try, every movie is not going to work. It's just, and a hard thing for me, certainly, and I'm sure for anybody, is, you get to a certain position because you're good at what you do and
Sure.
you're successful. And, there wasn't a whole lot of failure surrounding anything I'd done. And all of a sudden you're making movies and, holy shit, it's not going to all work. And because the scale of it is so big, the movie scale, your failures are mammoth. And, you can wipe out an entire year profit with the wrong decisions. So,
right.
I looked at it. I knew that one before I took the final job where it's your responsibility. And I knew I was going to get fired at some point when I was fighting with Murdoch. And again, I picked the fight. He didn't pick the fight. What I was stupid about is the billionaire is always going to win the fight.
Yeah.
So that might have been stupid on my part. But the other part of it was, I felt that pressure to the pressure of you're going to get fired but for the wrong decision was what made me better at what I did, or as good as I got, because every decision was a considered decision.
Sure. No, it makes perfect sense. Let's segue for a moment. I want to get into the heart of this, which I really want to talk about Titanic and how it came across the desk. Obviously, there's so many articles and books, and I've read a ton on it. I'm a massive fan, like almost everybody on the planet. But I'm also a Cameron fan and a fan of obviously the work ethic, the drive, the vision, the things he's gotten done over his career. Obviously, he is a maniac from what I understand, and is very challenging to work with. But I'd love to understand, again, the 30,000 foot view, how it came in the door, the sort of backroom discussions about how or if it was going to get made, and then ultimately the involvement from yourself and the studio to obviously turn it into one of the biggest movies of all time.
Well, I think he come off of True Lies, and again, Fox was like bottom of the barrel. So about the only sure bet it wasn't, you talk about an on talent driven studio. There was no talent at Fox, and really, except Jim, because they had a deal with Lightstorm, which led to, as I was coming in, led to True Lies. And then Jim showed up. I was working at that stage. I was president, and Peter Turner was CEO, chairman. And Jim came in with Titanic as a, in more than an idea. We called it scriptments. That he would long form it out almost like a novel with some scenes, so you got a feel for dialogue and character. But it was pretty much Titanic, and Peter in particular was aghast, but everybody in the business was, because Jim's success was as good as True Lies is. To me it's T2 and the
Yes.
Terminator
Yes.
movie, but T2 I thought was brilliant movie. As good as in sci-fi as anybody's ever made. And he did things he did in Titanic later, which was, kind of game-changing effects and stuff. So what everybody wanted, what my group wanted, they wanted P3, not
Yeah.
literally, but they wanted that next big scale adventure action, however you want to look at it. Picture, not a love story. And so the studio, and this was really led by Peter at the stage, was trying to get him trying to dissuade him, not understanding you can't dissuade Jim, off of Titanic to make something, more palatable or more, almost what goes on today, what everybody's looking for. Yesterday's news, everybody's, if I can quote from Fight Club, it's a copy of a copy. What everybody's looking for is something that can't fail. Disney has almost perfected it by
Mhm.
Marvel and and the Star Wars stuff and Pixar by, then they're not they're not making a new thing each time. They're making something, in the assembly line, which has been very, as you can see, completely successful. But so in Titanic's world, when I read, I thought this is great. And if you look at Jim's work, the performances in every one of his movies from the beginning of time on the performances are great.
Yeah.
He's always given the technical kudos, but not as much for, you know, there isn't anybody in one of those movies that's really not very good. So
Right.
I thought they could pull it off, and Peter was trying to get him to not do it, so I gave him a start date that wouldn't work, a budget that wouldn't work, um, and again, not understanding that Jim was going to come back and defy all that, which he did. So instead of it being all digital movie, with all the effects in the background, which is uncontrollable, we'll build the ship, we'll shoot it mostly practically and cut down on the cost overruns of you can't get the effects to work. And he'll start on the time, for release date and all that stuff. And of course, it was a disaster from the get go. And Peter got himself promoted so that he could duck and let me get the buzzsaw. A funny story, it took me 3 months to get, I took John Landau, who's the producer, off of the immediate stuff and brought in Marty Katz who had been head of production when I was at Disney, to come in with a team of people to figure out, because nobody could tell me this. And now I'm the CEO. And Peter was like run off to get away from this thing because it was, nobody could tell me what it cost to date, what it would cost to complete, when it would complete. We were losing 3 out of every 5 days on the schedule. And it was just, you didn't even know where you were.
Right.
It took 3 months to figure out we were $65 million over budget at that time, when the biggest movie made was $120 million or something
Wow.
at that stage. So we were like, our over budget was crazy. And Murdoch didn't know even we were over budget. And I just happened into that meeting, into a thing where I had gotten a number, and so for that, I guess, cemented my relationship with Murdoch. He looked at me with dollar signs, and they were all red. They weren't green. And what the hell is this? And it was really, the 65 was wrong. We were about 75. We ended up about 100 million over budget. But it was all controlled from that point on. And the process with Jim, which was extremely difficult.
Yeah.
He was I always say, the meanest guy I've ever dealt with, and not a false bully. He was like the real deal. And there were some real toe-to-toe stuff, but what I found through the process, and again, I was seeing, dailies that to me were magnificent. I saw the death stuff of Kate and Leo first, and you just go, okay, he can do all the rest. And what really came out of the process is, it wasn't the accoutrements. We cut all this stuff off of where there was extra spending and stuff. It wasn't about any personal luxuries or any
Hmm.
professional luxuries. He just wanted to make the greatest movie he could possibly make. So I thought, in one sense, our our interests were aligned. He said to me later that my choice was whether to make a crummy, cheaper, too expensive movie, ridiculously expensive movie, or roll the dice and make something great that is beyond being stupid in terms of
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah.
And I thought the only way out was the front door, not the rear door. You had to play for all the marbles, and if you lost, at least you failed with ambition.
Right. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal story. And so by the end of it, you were 100 million over budget, but the film opens incredibly, incredibly strongly. And so you guys knew early on you were going to be okay with it.
No, we were so expensive that that's not true. We were actually, I think we were, if you look, I don't remember, I think we were only like 20 or $30 million
Wow.
for the weekend because it's so long. Um, and it was a big fight because I had to sell the rights to Paramount, but I controlled the domestic distribution,
Okay.
release date, and the marketing. So I made them change the marketing and had them threaten me with a lawsuit because they wanted to release it at Thanksgiving. But because it was so long, and I know we had to play forever, I wanted Christmas, because if we opened successfully at Christmas, you had the through run of until Easter, basically. You wouldn't fight that same thing versus the 50 movies that open between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we had to survive in open seas, if that's the proper metaphor for it.
Sure.
And the first weekend, we did good, but I think we barely beat out James Bond, if I'm remembering right. But we were number one for 21 or 24 weeks, which is, that's the longest run of my profession, not my professional career, but of the time I've been in movies. Nobody's done that. It just kept going and going and going. So at the opening, I'll do it 3 weeks before we open. Paramount sold the movie to the networks for half of the price I got for Independence Day,
Wow.
because
Wow.
they were fire sailing.
A movie like Titanic being able to get made today, can it? Would it ever? What would that look like? And just your general thoughts on obviously how much the business has changed. Obviously, he's still getting things like Avatar made, so maybe not all that much. And maybe today, bigger is the only thing that seems like it does have a straight path to getting made.
Yeah, when we were going through Titanic, I openly talk, as I'm doing now, I openly talked about the problems of it, because I thought we were a warning sign that when
Sure.
if you're wrong and you're betting the house, you're not betting part of the house, you're now betting the whole house on one movie. I don't know that I think that's the smartest thing to do. So I did it as like, hey, we survived it. It worked for us, but that's a bad gamble most of the time. 100 million, yeah, 200 million at that stage was beyond being nutsy. And but it worked to such a level. It made whatever, $2.5–3 billion,
Sure.
that everybody took it the other way. And it's at that moment that I think the business got lost, because then bigger
Mm.
was better. I made X-Men, first Marvel movie, got fired over it. Nobody wants to see a Marvel. Nobody wants to see guys in spandex, and you're crazy for making it. And then, every Marvel movie costs more than Titanic.
Right.
So truth is, everybody thought bigger is better. And it wasn't, if I'm making a $50 million movie that makes $50 million, that's no longer, that's cigar money. That's not even interesting anymore.
Right.
So, today's world, in the streamers, they're making $200 million bets. They
Right.
don't, because they don't have anything really at risk. It's all on subscriptions. So,
Right.
I think the bigger is better is not the truth. I did this to somebody, and I always do when people are asking about the Oscars and stuff. The Oscars are the invert of the business, in that in the Oscars, small is good and big is bad. In the business world and the streamers and with the studios, big is good and small is bad.
Sure.
The truth of life is good is good and bad is bad.
Right.
It doesn't differentiate between big or small. A small movie that's great, everything, everywhere, anywhere, everywhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Time is great. Top Gun, Maverick is great.
Right.
Those are not diametrically opposed. They're part of the same thing. Those are filmmakers who made great, and film people. I don't just mean filmmaker, meaning directors, but
Yeah.
those are great films made by great people. And there are different pleasures. It's just like going from an Italian restaurant to a Chinese restaurant to a burger place. If you're getting crummy burgers, or you're getting crummy Italian food, or you're getting crummy Chinese flavor Chinese food, it's crummy, right?
It's a great perspective. No, and again, you've certainly seen the biggest and obviously smaller projects as well, and produced and greenlit content that's excellent, and it's really timeless on both sides of it. So again, kudos, Bill. Thank you on spending 45 minutes with us chatting. And again, really, really appreciate you taking the time and imparting some of the well-worn wisdom from a great career.
Just the war stories. All good. Happy to be a part and let people learn whatever they can learn from it.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Bye.